Nigeria is still basking in the euphoria of the successful hosting of the 7th General Assembly of the African Tax Administration Forum. For one whole week, Monday the 31st of October to Friday the 4th of November 2022, with the weekends before and after into the bargain, top tax administrators from 33 African countries and delegates from 15 partner organizations converged in Lagos in a hybrid form, both physically and virtually, to rethink revenue strategies. You'll recall that last episode, we shared with you reforms put in place by the FIRS to improve tax administration in Nigeria, as presented by a board member, Mrs. Ehile Ayibambe. A total of 6 panel sessions were held in the course of the assembly, along with plenary as well as meetings of committees and subcommittees. In line with the theme, Rethinking Revenue Strategies, the human face of taxation, the delegates looked at a variety of issues. Enhancing the quality of life in African countries, tax as a social contract and civic duty, as well as managing taxpayers' perception. Human-centered and socially responsible automation. Taxation as a tool in managing climate change. Taxing the present to save the future. The delegates also looked at taxing the digital economy and, more importantly, looking inwards, looking at themselves as tax administrators, to which a whole panel was devoted under the sub-theme, Human Capital in Tax Administration, the Tax Person of the Future. We promise to share with you blow-by-blow account of the proceedings at the General Assembly. That is what this episode is all about, plus how Nigeria's FIRS is taking its mandate as business. Business that takes the customer's interest into consideration at all times. My name is Chiamaka Hauchi and the program is Tax Matters. Welcome once again. We go back to the opening ceremony held earlier in the morning, at which Mr. Muhammad Nami gave a charge to the gathering, harping on the social contract between the government and the citizenry and how to encourage voluntary tax compliance.
One of the panel discussions will specifically focus on the relationship between good governance and its impact on tax compliance in Africa. Tax administrators, especially in developing countries like Africa, understand that this is a big drawback for tax morale in our climate. The fiscal social contract, which hinges on willingness of the citizens to pay tax in return for provision of public service, is a clarion call on the government at all levels in Africa to rethink governance. In my view, if we must transform our tax system and enhance revenue collection in Africa, there is a need for the government at all levels to engender public confidence and trust in government by providing value for taxpayers' money. More importantly, the government should reconsider how projects are reported in public space and the expected impact it will have on tax-paying culture. Such reports should be communicated to convey the idea that taxpayer money is used to fund infrastructure projects as against personalizing them.
We agree. Taxpayers must see and feel what their money is used for. We'll move on to the interviews we conducted with some of the delegates at the 7th General Assembly of ATAF. Looking at the theme of the 7th ATAF General Assembly, which is rethinking revenue strategies, the human face of taxation, why do we have to rethink revenue strategies at this time?
So I think if you look at over the last couple of years, the world has changed. Even something as like a consumption tax like VAT has become much more uh, complicated in the way we collect, and that is due to a lot of the digitalization that has taken place. So therefore, it is important that countries now start to re-look at their revenue strategies. So some of the things that are influencing it is, of course, digitalization, digital sales. I think COVID-19 showed us that, you know, there is much more that can be done on the digital platform. We've also seen that there's a much more bigger focus on things like environmental. We want multinationals that are investing in Africa to pay their fair share of taxes in Africa. We want to rethink about how we do tax incentives, for example. The other one is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which will have an impact on customs duty that is collected on the continent, which is one of the highest revenue collected on the continent. So we need to look at our tax bases and how we can expand it. So therefore, we need to relook at our revenue strategies. And this conference speaks directly to that, because as African countries, as developing countries, we need to mobilize more resources so that we can build stronger states. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, you know, if we have more revenue, we can have better health care, better education, better, you know, housing, etc., for our citizens.
Mr. Babatunde Oladapo is the Executive Secretary of the West African Tax Administration Forum, WATAF, the West African version of ATAF.
Sir, when we say rethinking revenue strategies, what key areas do you think we should look at? And also, how do you think we can change the concept of taxation in Nigeria and Africa at large?
Okay, rethinking tax administration, let me lay foundation in terms of the current reality, and that is things that have been happening in recent times. If you take a look at the onslaught of the COVID-19, you will agree with me that it brought not only the issue of health, which is key, because if people are not healthy, they cannot work. And if people die, it means you lose tax bill. And then when people are sick, it means government spending increases. And the question is, do we have enough to spend on health-related issues to keep people in good position to be able to work, and then government makes revenue out of the income they had? And then he also brought to fore the role of government in terms of providing for the welfare of the people. And we all know that how do government hand money is through taxes and other forms of collections that enables government to fund development and take care of the citizen. Then, aside from the COVID-19, which it's also a picture of things that may happen, it was a force majeure, it was never prepared for. So it brought to the fore how will government be able to have money, because the risk about our environment where we live is increasing daily. Not only COVID-19, the issue of climate-related challenges. So those are issues. How do government raise money? Keeping at the back of our mind that in sub-Saharan Africa and even Africa as a whole, we are below 18, the highest 18 tax revenue to GDP. So it shows that there's a financing gap that we have to plug. And to do this, we need to rethink how we run tax administration. Then when you also look at current trends, the way business is being done, COVID-19 also pronounced that. People had to resort to doing digital transactions. It has been there, e-commerce has been there, but during that period it became heightened and people saw potentials. Do I need to go to an office to transact business? I can do it online. So that creates a challenge for tax administration. People are no longer visible. People are no longer in offices that say number 16 Shonake Street. The game changed. People can transact multi-billion-dollar businesses by just clicking on their computer or making phone calls. So tax administration will have to up the game in terms of digitizing their operations And then beyond digitizing your operations to catch up with taxpayers, the issue of taxing digital services, not the only local one. There are other enterprises doing business and are not currently feasible physically in our jurisdictions. The likes of Facebook. Facebook allows you to meet your friend, but it's also a business platform. They gain revenue. They are not physically registered, and our law says, before then, our law says you have to be registered, you have to be here for a period before we'll tax you. The issue of residency. So we are losing revenue. The issue of Netflix. There are subscribers to Netflix in all parts of Africa. We consume the service here, but the tax doesn't come here, the money goes away. So those were global rules that we have to begin to take a look at so that we get our own fair share of taxes to be able to develop. So that brings about the issue of rethinking. And then when you now go back also, the issue of non-compliance, which is basically most time elicited by the fact that people want to ask questions, the social contract. What value do I get for paying my taxes? So that's a big question. So government will now have to think beyond being just tax administration to organizations that will have to look at taxpayers as customers. And the local parlance say customers are king. So we have to start looking at how do we treat them. They have a right to information. They have a right to be taught to do the right thing. The issue now is an issue of cooperative compliance, not carrying the big ticks. That's the rethinking part of it. We begin to rethink our process as we are digitizing. We are also transforming our processes to marketing-oriented ones. For instance, when banks want to take money away from you, they will come to your house, send you love messages. But the moment you keep their money, you are in the hole. When they see you are running away, they follow up. They send you messages on your birthday. It's not just to make you feel, yeah, we exist because you are. So those are the rethinking that tax administrations will have to be doing. Processes in terms of our legal framework, are they easy to comply with? Do people know about it? Communication. It has to percolate every strata of society. Because like you know that tax is paid on income hand. So it has to go beyond the formal sector, the informal sector, so that we can now engender a culture of cooperative compliance to elicit voluntary compliance.
There is so much to gain from these international linkages. ATAF, ATAF, Qatar, peer review, sharing of experiences, sharing best practices. So much, even beyond the taxation sector. Let's take you back into the conference hall.
We'll go into our first technical session, taxation and development, enhancing the quality of life in African countries.
Ms. Wagani Wamba was the moderator of the session.
It is expected that Africa takes full responsibility for financing her development, and improved tax revenue will have to take prime position. So the objective, ladies and gentlemen, of this particular session is to have a high-level conversation of the importance of DRM, domestic revenue mobilization, to development financing, including the areas of focus and reforms to enhance physical resource mobilization, maximization of natural resources, and curbing of illicit financial flows.
The panelists for Panel 1 are Dr. Ajoke Orelope Adefolire, Special Advisor to the Nigerian President on SDGs, who was represented by Dr. Bala Yusuf Yunuswa, Dr. Amelia Muidani, Commissioner General of Mozambique, Ms. Emily Muya, Chief of Capacity Building at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Dr. Philip Trede, the Chairman of ATAF, and Mr. Logan Worth, the Executive Secretary of ATAF. The moderator put this question to the UN ECOSOC representative.
What efforts are there at the UN to promote this sustainable source of revenue to ensure that in the mid-term to long-term, developing nations are able to finance their own development?
And I hope that most of you are familiar with the work of the UN Tax Committee. It is a subsidiary body of the Economic and Social Council that is very actively involved right now in all the areas that you have heard mentioned this morning, from wealth taxes to climate matters, to transparency, which is also one of the very vital parts in dealing with IFFs, to digital transformation, in both senses, depending on how you look at it. So digitalization of tax administration processes, and also looking at how to tax companies that are operating in a digitalized and globalized economy. So what the UN is doing at the moment, of course, the tax committee develops the practical and policy guidance for developing countries. And at the moment, most of these areas that I have mentioned, we already have existing guidance in the form of handbooks or manuals. And for example, in last year, in 2021, the UN, most of you have been following the discussions around the taxation of the digital economy. The UN introduced an Article 12B in the UN Model Tax Convention, or Tax Treaty as some people like to call it. And this article addresses the taxation of automated digital services. And this was in response to developing countries asking for a simple and easy to administer provision to deal with the digital economy. But there is also guidance in many of the other areas that I mentioned, climate. We have a handbook on carbon taxation, and in there we've really tried to mainstream all the issues that are relevant for developing countries. Africa is not one of the leading emitters, but we do suffer from the emissions anyway. I would encourage all of you to please follow the work or developing, especially on this energy transition line of work of the UN being dealt with, from environmental taxation and extractive industries taxation, because this is one of the most relevant, especially for resource-rich countries. And there is a lot of the other work that we are doing, and I would mention specifically how the work of the tax committee gels in with the work on capacity development, which is the part that I head at the UN. And what we do here is to disseminate this guidance to developing countries through trainings and capacity building.
One thing rang through the 7th ATAF General Assembly, and that is the need to encourage voluntary tax compliance into citizenry by utilizing taxpayers' money well and judiciously, and showcasing it all for all to see.
Thank you very much, Mr. Logan Watt. Our theme is about the human face of taxation. So when we implement these strategies, how is that expected to improve the life of the African?
The important part of their work is to improve our ability to collect revenue. That revenue yield reduces the need for increased tax rates, because the lower your tax rate, the more you collect. But you can only collect more if you've got efficient administration. What does all of this mean? Reduced tax rates put cash in hand of citizens. And when citizens have cash in hand, they are able to feed their families. When citizens have cash in hand, they are able to supplement education, spend on health, and especially in rural areas, they can invest in subsistence agriculture in a far better way. That is what we mean by enhancing the human face of taxation. When taxation begins to rely on indirect taxes such as VAT, which is relatively easy to collect, you're increasingly putting the burden on poor people. But if taxation begins to specialize and segment our society and say there are segments in our society that exponentially generates more wealth and can proportionally contribute more to the fiscus, you then begin to reduce the burden on poorer people, and therefore also on the state, to begin to have current spending that is non-returnable in terms of interest. And the state can spend more in infrastructure. So when revenue money is spent on capital projects, When revenue money is spent on projects that renders return for the citizens of the state, you increase the quality of life of citizens. So that is the trend of thinking about the social contract.
Following closely behind Session 1 was Session 2 with the sub-theme, Tax as a Social Contract and Civic Duty, Managing Taxpayers' Perception. That will be our takeoff point on the next installment of the ATAF story. As the saying goes, think global and act local, from the international realm to the home front. It is incontrovertible that the Federal Inland Revenue Service takes its mandate seriously, very seriously. At the FIRS, tax assessment, tax collection, and tax accounting are taken as serious business. And so where businessmen are gathered, where businesswomen are gathered, you will find the FIRS rubbing shoulders, offering advice, offering help, clarifying issues. One good example is the practice of setting up booth or pavilion, if you like, at trade fairs. On Wednesday, the 9th of October, the FIRS held its day at the Lagos International Trade Fair, where it had set up a booth for the duration of the trade fair. On hand to receive visitors, FIRS officials, and varied exhibitors was the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the foremost chamber of commerce in Nigeria.
I wish to commend the executive chairman of FIRS, Mr. Mohammed Nami, and the executive management of the FIRS for their commitment to institutional reforms, tax awareness, and the leverage of technology to reposition FIRS for the delivery of quality services. We therefore urge the FIRS to deploy more technology for its operations, as this will make tax payment easier, more efficient, and will lead to more tax compliance in the long run.
At the head of the FIRS delegation at the FIRS Day was Hajia Sada Tuyero, Director Taxpayer Service Department at the FIRS.
The role Federal Inland Revenue Service plays in the economic growth and development of our nation cannot be overemphasized, as the revenue from crude oil is constantly nosediving. Hence, the only sustainable source of revenue to government today is revenue from taxes. It is imperative to note that federal inland revenue contribution to federation accounts for more than 60% of the total revenue distributed to the various tiers of government. One of the four cardinal objectives of the chairman Federal Inland Revenue Service, Alhaji Muhammad Nami, is for the service to be customer-centric. This simply means that the taxpayer remains our major customers and critical stakeholders in the tax ecosystem. The tax obligation and the rights of the taxpayers can only be determined when you are being sensitized and enlightened. It is imperative to keep them informed, sensitized, engaged, assisted, and educated to enable them fulfill their tax obligation without any hitches.
Still on making the customer the centerpiece of its operations.
The service also has a world-class, fully automated contact center where taxpayers can call to lodge their complaints and make inquiries in various languages that include English, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, Pidgin, French, as well as Arabic language, and will be attended to promptly by our well-trained professional staff. The service has also introduced a self-service stations in all the tax offices across the country, where taxpayers can walk in and have access to internet and use the tax promax solution to to transact business with the service. The self-service stations are equipped with dedicated tabletop computer system and technical officers to assist them with their tax compliance obligation. These initiatives are meant to make tax compliance as easy as ABC. I want to encourage all businesses and the general public to continue to perform their civic responsibility by paying their taxes at when due to avoid sanctions.
On hand to lend support to the FIRS on its day was a representative of the Tax Professional Association, the CITN. Tax Matters visited the FIRS booth at the week-long fair and experienced firsthand the interaction of FIRS staff with our customers. There you go again. Tax collection is serious business, and that is the way the FIRS handles its mandates. Until we meet again next week, stay clean, fulfill your tax obligations, and drive safely. Thank you for watching.